One of our core values at Homeschool Made Simple is to help families make their children lovers of books. It is the message Carole began this ministry with over 30 years ago, and it is the message we continue to repeat today. It seems so simple, yet it is the key to educational success. We're exploring that topic today. You're listening to the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. This is a podcast to help you homeschool simply, inexpensively, and enjoyably. Carole Joy Seid has been helping families homeschool for several decades through her literature-based approach to education. In this episode from the archive, Carole shares about a book called The Enchanted Hour, which will remind you once again of the power of reading to your children. Before we jump in, if you're looking to build your family's home library and fill your shelves with the best books, download our free book list with over 150 books. You can find it at homeschoolmadesimple.net/booklist. Listen in.
Well, I'm sitting at my dining room table on a kind of rainy, gloomy day, and I want to introduce you to someone who I am completely enamored with. Her name is Megan Cox-Gurdon, and she is the children's literature editor of the Wall Street Journal. Any paper that has a children's editor has got to be quite a good paper who appreciates children and values them. And if you've been to my seminars over the years, I'm constantly quoting from Wall Street Journal articles written by Megan or Imprimis magazine or you name it. She's quoted everywhere. But I want to introduce you to a book that she wrote several years ago. And if it were up to me, I would just read you this entire book word by word on the podcast, but that would be illegal. So I'm not going to try, but I am going to share some things from it. The name of the book is The Enchanted Hour, subtitled The Miraculous Power of Reading Aloud in the Age of Distraction. Don't you love that? So Megan is quite a woman. She graduated summa cum laude from, I believe it was Bowdoin. She lives in Washington. Her husband is also in the news business, a foreign correspondent. She began working for the Wall Street Journal in 2005, and she has written for every major news in America. And she also worked as an overseas correspondent in Hong Kong, Tokyo, London, and she's, traveled and reported from all over the world: Cambodia, Somalia, China, Israel, South Korea, Northern Ireland. But the best part about her is that she and her husband have 5 wonderful children. And I love to tell the story of how Megan got involved in reading out loud. So when she was a young woman, I don't know if she was married yet, but she was at a dinner party and she had no children. And all of a sudden, the hostess of the party is gone. And she's gone for a really long time. And so Megan said to this lady's husband who is hosting the party, "Where's your wife? Is there something wrong? Is she okay?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, everything's fine. She's just reading to the boys." And literally like an hour later, the lady comes back to her own dinner party. And Megan was just like, "What on earth?" And the woman actually is a film producer and, certainly not, sort of a Little House on the Prairie mom. And Megan was so impressed by this. So she began doing research about, is this something important to do if we have children? So as she and her husband began having children, she had her very first baby. And she brought the baby home. I believe it's a little girl. And she brought her home from the hospital. And she tells the story of putting this newborn baby, like 4-day-old baby, on a chair, laying her down or whatever, and beginning to read this very elaborate fairy tale to her. And the baby was like wailing and crying. And Megan, being a brand new mother, had no idea. She's like, "Okay, this isn't working. I must not be doing something right." And that began her journey. And she and her husband have read to their children, particularly Megan has, their entire lives. And many of them, I believe, are now grown. But she is just an evangelist for reading out loud with kids. There was a Wall Street Journal article, January 19th, 2019, and it was called The Secret Power of the Children's Picture Book. And she talks about how when mothers are looking at an electronic screen, she says this: children learn to naturally regulate their attention when they're focusing on a task they find interesting in a context that is nurturing, warm, and responsive, as Vanderbilt University's David Dickinson put it in a paper summarizing the rich developmental value of reading out loud. She says, in contrast, fast-paced TV shows have been shown to impair executive function in young children after as little as 9 minutes of viewing. Nor is that the only downside. Babies look at adults to see where we're looking. So if we're glued to our electronic devices, that's what will draw their gaze too. What they see may not be what we want them to see. As the psychologist Catherine Steiner Adair has written, babies are often distressed when they look to their parent for a reassuring connection and discover the parent is distracted or uninterested. Studies show that they're especially perturbed by a mother's flat or emotionless expression, something we might once have associated with a depressive caregiver, but which is now eerily similar to the expressionless face we adopt when we stare down to text, stare away as we talk on our phones, or stare into a screen as we go online. So reading picture books has the complete opposite effect, she says. It removes the negative of extra screen time while adding a terrific positive in the form of skill and brain-building effects. It's a perfect way to ensure that babies and young children get what their eyes so benefit from seeing: wonderful pictures in books and the wonderful human face. In her book, The Enchanted Hour, Megan talks about some very scientific and technical research that has been done in a research program in Cincinnati. And what they were studying was what goes on in a child's brain with different experiences. The first experience was they're studying brain activity when they're listening to stories. The second, when they're hearing stories while looking at illustrations. And third, when the same children are watching animated entertainment. So they wired the children up and they put them into this scientific study, and they found this. First, they did a baseline. What's going on when the children are resting and just looking at a smiley face emoji? Then the image is removed and the experiment begins. One by one, separated by intervals of rest, the preschoolers lay in the dark, listening through headphones to stories with varying levels of visual stimulus. So they read 3 different stories, all by the same author, so trying to create kind of a level playing field, so they're not reading something of high interest and then something boring, but they're reading 3 books by the same author. First was The Sand Castle Contest by Robert Munsch, and it was being read by the author, but the children were just hearing the story and they were seeing no pictures. For stage 2, they listened to another story by this author, and it's called Andrew's Loose Tooth. It's being read by the author, but it's being accompanied by the illustrations from the book. And then in phase 3, the children are watching and listening to an animated version of Munch's The Fire Station. It was to see what happened in specific brain networks that support early literacy skills. So there were 5 areas they were studying. They're studying the cerebellum, the default mode network, the visual imagery network, the semantic network, and the visual perception network. And she says the results were breathtaking. Dr. Hutton walked her through a chart displaying the team's preliminary conclusions. So the rectangles in red are the sign of the greatest and highest activity of statistical significance. Pink, a little bit less. Pale and dark blue, where the brain network has appeared to be idle.
JJ's Side here. If you're looking for a new math curriculum for next school year, I'd like to tell you about CTC Math. We've got 4 kids at home ranging in age from 16 all the way down to 8. They've got totally different personalities, but for the last couple of years, they've all been loving CTC Math. I found out the founder, Pat Murray, is passionate about teaching simply, concretely, and quickly so kids aren't sitting through really long math lectures. He's got a bunch of kids at home himself. He's a highly awarded and decorated math teacher, and he knows how to make it really fun. I'm now watching all 4 of my kids enjoy doing their math, and I'm watching them get more confident as they do their math. I really like that they each get to go at their own pace. They're able to master each concept before they move on to the next one. And they've made it really intuitive so you can go back and review anything that you've forgotten along the way, which is so key for math. So I'd encourage you to give it a try with a free trial they're offering. You can click the link in the show notes to learn more at ctcmath.com. JJ Side here with an update from our ministry partner, Crossway Books. I'm holding in my hands the new Sing hymnal, beautifully typeset in red and black ink, with almost 500 carefully curated hymns led by Keith and Kristen Getty, with advisory council members like Tim Keller and Alistair Begg and John Piper carefully picking some of the most beautiful hymns, both ancient and modern. It also includes over 400 prayers from across church history, something to help you with family worship, something for churches to engage together. I just love this new resource from Crossway. You can pick up a copy of the Sing hymnal wherever books are sold, or visit crossway.org/hymns of worship to learn how to get 30% off with a free Crossway Plus account.
So she says, we looked first at the data showing what happened when children were listening without seeing anything. And there was one red rectangle. So the doctor said, you're getting a little bit cooking. A few networks are up. But what stands out is the connection between the introspection and how does this relate to my life and understanding. There's very little connection being made because, as she explains, children have very limited experience and haven't built a large library of images, feelings, and memories to draw on. As we talk about in my seminars, children are concrete. So anything that is abstract, symbolic, non-representational is very hard for young children to connect with. So then he moves his finger over the doctor showing Megan the research. He shows her the next column. And this is the one where children are looking at pictures while they're listening to a story. And the doctor turns to Megan and says, bam! All these networks are firing and connecting with one another. And she said, well, you didn't need a medical degree to see this. It was just bright red boxes everywhere. They're listening, they're looking, and their networks are all connecting, reinforcing these intellectual connections. Then Dr. Hutton points to the third graph, and he said, but then if you compare that with the video, everything kind of drops. We sat in silence for a moment, looking at the third portion of the graph. All the red, which meant things were firing, had turned blue. It's like the brain stops doing anything, Megan says. Yes, he said, except for the visual perception. They're seeing the story, they're watching it, but nothing is going on in terms of these higher order brain networks that are involved with learning. What seems to be happening is the decoupling of vision, imagery, and language. The child is seeing the story and watching it, but there's no integration with the higher order brain networks. The brain doesn't have to do any work. Imagination falls off a cliff. And she says, oh, well, what are the implications of this? And he says, in the behavior literature, it's clear that kids who have too much screen time have defects in different areas like language, imagination, and attention. She said his expression became very grave. The years from 3 to 5 represent a formative stage of development. If what we know about brain plasticity is true, it will be harder for kids who grow up with undeveloped networks to learn, to come up with their own ideas, to imagine what's going on in stories and connect. they'll be much more dependent on stuff being fed to them passively. He said it's a huge problem, and it's becoming more so as screens become more portable. There is no natural barrier to use. Megan says, it's as though nothing is happening in their head while they're watching the video. Then she talked about a researcher in England, and his name is Adam Swift. And he did research on children and children who are read to and have family culture and children who are not. And it became a big controversy in England because he kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way said that he wrote something in the British press that people who read aloud to their children ought to reflect on the way that they are unfairly disadvantaging other people's children. He was just being humorous, but the whole country went nuts and didn't get the joke. The evidence shows, Mr. Swift, the philosopher, says, that the difference between children who get bedtime stories or have family culture or have family table time at meals, that those children have a huge difference in their life chances. That this difference is bigger than the difference between those who get elite private schooling and those that don't. So simply reading out loud, eating meals together, having family culture, being involved with your children's lives, that those things give your children a, quote, unfair advantage in formal academics. And he says, and he goes on to say, it's the single most important factor between rich kids and poor kids as measured by literacy, mathematics, language test scores at the age of 4, that they can tell the difference if children are parenting in this way, reading out loud to their kids, taking them to the library, surrounding them with books, being sensitive and nurturing, the researcher said, that those are the things that make a bigger difference than sending your children off to an elite prep school or an elite college. So this is something any family can do. We always talk in the seminars about needing a Bible, a library card, and a math program, and that these are really the key foundational elements in creating really engaged, intelligent children. And the most important thing, of course, is reading out loud, but combining that with work and service, that 3-legged stool: study, work, service. And of course, literacy is really the key to so much in understanding how a child is going to develop. 1/5 of American teenagers are currently leaving high school functionally illiterate. 20% of American teenagers can't read the directions on a soup can or the warnings on a poison box. 20% are graduating from high school with that kind of deficit. And when you combine that with crime, we find that 85% of the kids who get into trouble with the law have poor literacy skills. That illiteracy is directly linked to jail time. If you do research on the people in jail, you find that across the board, they are low or even non-readers. It's a tragic thing. So her book talks about this family that she met, and I'm not sure how she met them, but she put them into a challenge of, what if you read out loud to your kids? So Megan Cox-Gurdon brought all these books to this family, and their name was the Rashids, and their names are Julie and Alex. And she said they had heard it was a good idea to read to their children. They planned to do it someday, but they were so busy and so much going on, and they had big extended Greek and Syrian families, and they had a huge big screen TV and iPhones and iPads and all that going on. They had a baby, so they decided to do a 3-month trial that would take them from reading nothing out loud to reading every day. And they promised that they would turn off their tech and read for at least half an hour each time that they did it. So she brought a whole bunch of books and everyone was excited. The baby was kind of ripping the books and throwing them in the air and jumping on them, which gave her pain. But she smiled and left. And then she came back 3 months later. So they started reading out loud, and she said the entire family culture had changed by the time that she came back. She couldn't believe it. The older children were reading on their own for pleasure. The baby would sit quietly to be read to. The house was so much more cohesive and calm and integrated that the family just had felt so disjointed and so just chaotic. But instead, it was a beautiful thing what had happened in their home and how each of them started reading. It's a beautiful story, and it just took a very short time and a really small commitment to make it happen. So I wanted to read you the table of contents of some of these chapters in her book because I want you to run, not walk, to get this book, give it to everyone for Christmas. You will love this book. The first chapter is What Reading to Children Does to Their Brains, Why Books Trump Screens, and Why All Children Need and Deserve the Cognitive Boost, the boost in reasoning. 2, Where It All Began, Once Upon a Time. And she tells about how through history, the oral tradition of the storytellers in the Middle Ages, even back in Greece and Rome, how even in Israel, of course, the oral telling of tales, how the word of God was transmitted. And then how when you read together, it strengthens the bonds of love. It creates chemistry and connection. And even when people are far apart, that a dad can be in China on a business trip and he can FaceTime in reading aloud the book that he's reading to the family and read another chapter, from China or whoever he is on business. And then 4, turbocharging child development with picture books. How when you read picture books, to young children, it accelerates the development of trust, empathy, language, attention span, self-control, and healthy, happy routines in the home. And then she talks about a vast vocabulary that you expose listeners to millions of words they might never have heard. And it unlocks a world for your children. And then the power of paying attention. Complicated and mysterious things happen when we give children and teenagers time to listen. They escape the here and now, and they can soar in their imagination, explore their intellects, meet sophisticated and complex works of literature as equals. They become friends with people in very abstract and sophisticated worlds and books by simply listening while you read out loud. And then how reading out loud furnishes the mind, and it exposes children to art and beauty and cultural literacy. And so you're passing on the classics, and you're developing a love for the aesthetics, for beautiful, meaningful things. You're raising the bar. You're raising your children's expectations for what is normal life. It's a higher realm than what they may see in just their everyday living. And then she talks about reading from the nursery to the nursing home. And as I read that chapter, I thought about how when my mom had dementia, I took her on a trip to her home down in Florida that she had been away from for a period of time in a assisted living place. And I took her to Florida for, I think it was a month. And I thought, what are we going to do together? And so every night I had her read one of my favorite books called How Dear to My Heart by Emily Kimbrough. And I'm going to do a podcast on that book soon, but it is a delightful retelling of Emily Kimbrough's childhood in Muncie, Indiana, and she was an only child, and she had all these fun aunts and uncles and grandparents, and they all lived in walking distance there in Muncie, and it is the most delightful book. And my mom, at about 94, each evening, I'd say, get in your PJs, and then we would sit in her lovely living room, and I would have her read to me out loud, and how it helped her to focus, because being read to, she couldn't concentrate. But by her reading to me, how she was able to elevate and to function on a much higher level than she was doing, in the course of the day. So these are some of the ideas that Megan Cox-Gurdon focuses on in the Enchanted Hour. And I promise you, this is a book you're going to want to read. Underline. Mine is marked from cover to cover. I have stars, different colors of highlighting and underlinings, and I've read through the book twice, and I'll probably read it again because it's just so rich, and it will inspire you and encourage you and give you a vision to not take no for an answer when it comes to reading out loud to your children.
You've been listening to the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. If you like what you heard in this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or share this episode with a friend. It means so much when you help us spread the message of Homeschool Made Simple with others. Thanks for joining us this week on the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. Remember, Jesus' commandments are not burdensome. What he calls you to do, he will enable you to do. Blessings.